screen. Can everyone see that? Yes, okay, I'm seeing nods. Okay. Well, I want to kick this off by welcoming everyone to the opening session of Open Repositories 2021. It's our 16th conference. We're so pleased that everyone could be here. If not in person, virtually is wonderful. We have a really exciting conference for you this year, and we're just thrilled that so many people are going to be joining us. I'm Sarah Shreeves. I'm the chair of the Open Repositories Steering Committee, and want to do this welcome. I'm going to just start with some brief logistical pieces. I'm also serving essentially as the host chair this year, since we usually have a in-person institution. We usually have somebody from that institution serving as host, but since we're virtual this year, I am serving as the host. So I first just want to note our steering committee. This is your Open Repository Steering Committee. These are the folks who spend all year doing the planning and work to pull off the conference, alongside our program chairs who become temporary members of the steering committee. I want to note a couple of changes in our steering committee. First, to note that we have two folks stepping down who have been long-time members, John Dunn and Jirki Ilva, who will be stepping down this year from the steering committee. We want to thank them for their service and to wish them well as they go on. They have both made enormous contributions to the conference, and please excuse my beagle in the background. I also am going to be stepping down as chair as of this conference. Actually, this is my last conference as chair of the steering committee, and Claire Knowles will be stepping into the chair role. Torsten Reimer will be stepping in as our vice chair. So you will have new leadership of the steering committee, and we're really excited about that. This also means that we are going to have two new spaces for members. So we're going to be putting out a call for new members on June 14th. Nominations will be due by July 30th. And elections, the steering committee will select members in August, and new members would join in September. So please watch for that announcement. We will be making that pretty much immediately after the conference. And we look forward to seeing who applies. I also want to thank our sponsors for their contributions. We had 6 sponsors this year. Sponsorship of a conference, even a virtual conference, has expenses. And so this conference couldn't take place without our sponsors. I really appreciate that this group of folks decided that even with the virtual conference, it was worth supporting Open Repositories. All of these folks have been supporters of OR, and so I really do want to state my appreciation. I also want to note that we will be having networking sessions on each day, on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and you'll have a chance to talk to the sponsors within that session, and I'll be touching on that in a little bit. I also want to thank the organizations who provided technical and logistical support for the conference. We had a group of folks who basically volunteered Zoom, and other hosting resources. So thank you to all of these organizations who, without whom we couldn't have put on open repositories. We have the benefit of having a virtual conference is that we are getting an enormous spread of participants from around the world. We have about 1,300 participants who registered this year from 90 countries and from every continent except Antarctica. This is amazing to me. Open Repositories has always been a very international conference, but this is really incredible. And I think that is a virtue of the virtual format, is that we can truly have this type of representation at a conference and this type of participation. It's really lovely to see. So I hope that you'll take opportunities in our networking sessions and asking questions of participants to meet people from outside of your local context, outside of your country, to talk about what's happening in other parts of the world around open repositories, around open access, and other areas of interest. I think it's really important that we really understand that the activity that's happening all over the world around these issues. A couple of more logistics. As you will have seen, you will be getting daily emails that include the highlights for each day. We'll also include links to, you'll also get an email once you're registered in SCED. You'll get emails from SCED that will include the things that you signed up for, your agenda. SCED will always include the latest information about the conference, so please do always look there for links or other information. As I said, we'll have networking opportunities and opportunities to talk to sponsors on a platform called Wonder. I also want to encourage you to check out the posters. All of the posters are on the Open Repositories 2021 website. You can comment on them there, review them, and then tomorrow we'll be having Minute Madness, and so you can hear the conversation happening in Minute Madness about these. But this is one of those posters are perhaps one of the most challenging things in terms of the logistical pieces of a virtual conference, because you can't have that poster reception in the same way. So we're hoping by putting up the posters, allowing comments, that we can allow some conversation there and for people to really interact with the posters. So please do take a look at them. I also want to remind everyone of our code of conduct that we have for open repositories. Please do go and read this. I will say that just to repeat a couple of things that we have here on the slide, we are dedicated to providing a welcoming and positive experience for everyone, whether we're in a formal session like this or an informal session like a networking session, or on Twitter, or in chat. Open repository participants come from all over the world and have a variety of professional and personal and social backgrounds, and we treat all with dignity and respect. We do not tolerate harassment or discrimination in any form. So if you experience or witness a violation of the code of conduct, please direct message the Zoom host or the Wonder host, and email this email address. We will also have folks who are essentially monitoring for any kind of conduct problems that we can see. But please do contact us, because we may not see everything. And we do reserve the right to take immediate action to remedy any disruptive behavior. So a little bit about our networking platform, which you'll have access to. So at the end of our sessions in OR today, there's a hour-long networking session where you'll be able to access this platform called Wonder. You'll find the link and password in Sched. And this is really an opportunity to have conversations with our sponsors. All the sponsors will have folks there. When you log into Wonder, you'll be asked to enter your name and take a photo just through your webcam. And you can then enter the space and you can use your arrow keys to move around. And so you can have groups of people talking to one another. You can move towards, let's say you want to talk to one of the sponsors, you can move towards the sponsor and then be able to engage with them. Just as a reminder, of course, the code of conduct applies here as well. There will be hosts in every session and you'll be able to see that through their name. They'll say something like host in their name. So you'll be able to see that. This is our first time trying this, so we hope it'll work well. We've tried it out a few times with some smaller groups, so I'm hoping that we'll find that this works well for at least giving us a taste of that networking experience that so many of us have had at past open repositories. So I'm now going to pass the mic over to Irina, who is going to talk a little bit about the program. Irina is one of our program co-chairs. I actually should pause here and just thank Irina, Liz, and Layla, who are our program chairs and who have done just a tremendous job pulling together the program, wrangling the reviewing process, reaching out to different keynotes to bring folks in. They deserve so much thanks for the work they've done on this program. So I just want to acknowledge that their work on this. So over to you, Irina.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and welcome everyone. If we go to the next slide, please. I would also like to thank our program committee members and our local hosts, and you will be seeing them at different sessions, networking events as moderators, hosts. So thanks a lot, Adam, Dimity, Harish, Michele, Andrew, Tomasz, Nancy, Washington, Marie, Mimi, Alan, Bennett, Catherine, John, Jessica, David, and of course, Sarah. I think you all deserve a big round of applause. Next slide, please. I would also like to thank our 167 reviewers. Unfortunately, I won't be able to read all the names, but I would love to. So that's another round of virtual applauses. Thank you so much for your help in shaping this program. And if we could go to the next slide, we'll make slides available and we listed everyone. And thanks again for reviewing all the submissions. Next slide, please. And that's what we're going to present to you today. So we have 3 keynote sessions. We have 40 conference sessions, 110 contributions, 200 speakers. And thanks a lot to our workshops hosts. Yesterday, we already had 8 workshops, and slides and recordings are available on our YouTube channel. And we're also live streaming this event there. And if you give us some more likes, because it's a new channel, when we get 100 likes, then we can change a channel name to Open Repositories, because now it's a bit clumsy long name. And of course, we upload everything on our Open Repositories Zenoda community. So looking forward to the conference. And Now it's my great pleasure. Yes, please, Sarah, please change the slides. It's my great.
You're muted, Irina.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Jeremy Farrar. And when we were planning this conference, originally we wanted to have it last year in South Africa under the title Open for All. How well do repositories support knowledge in the service of society? How well do they enable local knowledge sharing and support not only academic use, but also use in education and practice? And of course, this year we added a new team, which is New Connections, Global Conversations, and pandemic response. And I really don't know anyone who can talk about this better. And Jeremy Farrar is a director of Wellcome. And thank you so much, Jeremy, for spending this time with us. Before joining Wellcome, Jeremy was director of the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit in Vietnam for 18 years. And his research interests were infectious diseases and global health, with a focus on emerging infections. And has published numerous articles, mentored many dozens of students and fellows, served as a chair on several advisory boards. And he asked me not to read his full bio, but you can read it on the conference website. So thank you so much, Jeremy. And over to you now.
Thanks very much, Irina. Thanks for cutting that short. I'll make sure we edit it in a better way in future. And Sarah, thank you very much for the introduction as well. It's very it's heartwarming and uplifting to have an organisation be so committed to being inclusive and welcoming to everybody, wherever everybody is in the world. So thank you very much, Sarah, for that introduction, Irina, for the invitation to join you today. Whenever you planned this, and I don't know when your planning started for this, but it couldn't, in many ways, come at a better time, and at a time when we all have to think of the things we do. How are they going to be affected by the events of the last 18 months or so? And that's why it's such a pleasure to be able to join you today at the Open Repositories conference, because I think COVID in many ways has and will continue to change everything. And of course, it will not be the last such disruptive event in the 21st century. If you look at the drivers of how COVID has come to be such a devastating impact on the world, and just to say at the start, I think we're closer to the start of this pandemic than we are to the end. However, that may feel slightly different in some countries, but at a global level, I think we are closer to the start of the impact of this than to the end. And if you think of the real drivers of COVID, and you see COVID as the outcome, but ask what are the real drivers of COVID? And indeed, what have been the drivers of the more frequent and more complex epidemics and pandemics of the last 25 years? Those drivers are all drivers which will define in many, many ways the 21st century. And that's why I think we have to deal with COVID today and bring it whatever to an end means, and do it as fast as we can. Because as I say, we're closer to the start of the pandemic than the end. But we must also have a little bit of an eye on the future and start to learn lessons. Because if you don't learn lessons from dreadful events such as this, then you are bound to repeat them. And the drivers of COVID are ecological change, environment change, land use change. There are changes in the way animals and humans interact, both domestic animals and wild animals, and how those animals interact with humans, including the agricultural sector. And then humans have changed dramatically in the last 20 years, not necessarily genetically, although of course to some degree they have, but But in terms of society, urbanization has been a drive now for decades, if not centuries, and will continue in the coming years. And of course, as in so many aspects of our lives now, trade and travel and supply chains mean the world is very small and indeed getting smaller. And it's those issues which are really the driver of COVID. And actually, they are all issues of the 21st century, which are only likely to increase in the speed at which they're happening. And that will inevitably lead, yes, to more complex and more frequent epidemics, regional or global pandemics. But also those drivers are critical for some of the other great challenges of our time. You could argue what they might be, but I might have a list that would certainly include climate, access to energy, access to clean water, the threat today, or the risk, the reality of drug-resistant infections, inequality that's been shown to be such an issue in COVID within and between societies, migration, and inevitably we must bring in conflict in that. Humanity has a long track record of seeing conflict as a way out of sometimes its problems. And this isn't going to be different in the 21st century. So where that's leading us is that I think there will be a convergence happening globally, and indeed a smallness of the world that the environmental community has known for some time, but is starting to impact on the rest of our lives. These issues which I highlight are also critically ones where science will have a really important role. And whenever I use the word science, I mean the very broadest range of science, from social sciences through biomedical sciences to engineering, to mathematics, to the physical sciences, to behavioral science, psychology, sociology, and everything else. I see the word science as embracing all of that. And science has undoubtedly a critical role to play, as it is playing in the last 18 months within COVID. But if you take many of those great challenges of our time, it will also come with massive public interest and massive public engagement and an involvement in society and amongst communities. Public and philanthropic funding will need to increase to both prevent and respond to these issues. And it'll have to learn in a way that COVID again has brought home to be able to do those at speed and at scale, that they will have to be transdisciplinary, they will have to be transnational, they'll have to be transparent, and that science, as we wish to define it, will have to have a very direct willingness and ability to share, and to have a direct and willingness to engage, involve, and bring together society, policy, and yes, politics. There will be costs and there'll be trade-offs, there will be debate and there'll be disagreement. And those debates, as we've seen today, and pick out one example, the origins of the virus, will often be very polarized and very political. And that is not an environment, if you like, where I think necessarily the scientific community, which I feel part of, has necessarily felt comfortable with in the past. And why I mention all of that is because I think that has absolutely direct relevance to your work you are all doing in terms of openness, transparency around information and the sharing of that in repositories, in publications, and in the sharing of data. And we must include, when we talk about sharing, the sharing of the benefits that can accrue from that work. So this will change the way we work, it'll change the way we socialize, it'll change the way we spend our time working and communicate. So I think we are, if you like, seeing the dawn almost of a new era in the way things will work. And COVID has been the awful catalyst to that, but I think it applies to many of the things that we will see and will trouble us, and for which there are opportunities if we think ahead of our time. So I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes or so. I hope that is okay, and very happy to stay on and take any questions if that's possible. But just to focus now back on the pandemic and my own personal experience, I think it highlights the critical importance of the open access to articles, but also data, and that was recognized from the start of the pandemic. At the start of the pandemic, Wellcome, along with many, many other partners, peers, colleagues around the world, published a statement calling on all researchers, journals, funders, to ensure that the research findings and data relevant to the pandemic were shared rapidly and openly to inform the public health responses and help save lives. And to date, over 150, 160 organizations have signed up to that. And I think it's undoubtedly, I hope, played a small role in ensuring more accessible information and more accessible data. And just also, before I move off on that, and as an aside, we've recently just published a call for funding from a combination of funders, including ourselves, to understand the impact of increased requirements for rapid and open sharing of data and how that's actually impacted on our ability to respond. And that's available on the Wellcome website, along with our colleagues and partners who are involved in this as well. And publishers have responded to the pandemic, and I think do deserve great credit. They have made, the ones that have committed to this, made all the COVID-related content free to read. And just as an example of that, over 50 publishers have made available, I think, over 150,000 COVID-related articles over the period of the last 15 months or so, articles free to read in PubMed Central. And in April 2021 alone, those articles had been viewed more than 17 million times. That is, by our estimation, an order of magnitude or more than they would have been had they not been free to read by everybody. And crucially, this means this move has highlighted the critical importance of making research articles openly accessible, as no one could seriously question in the middle of the worst public health crisis in 100 years to entertain the notion that research findings, which would be critical and have been critical to the advances made in the last 15 months, that would be somehow hidden behind a paywall, available only to some people and not to others, and might be in that sort of nether region of access for 6 to 12 months or potentially even longer. And logically, of course, this gives rise to the notion, if we agree that the scientific information related to COVID should not be behind such paywalls, then why not research to other issues that are of equal impact, albeit maybe not at the speed of COVID, but will by necessity over the coming weeks, months, and years have similar impacts, or even bigger, climate change. I'm thinking about food security and even other health issues such as cancer and diabetes. So in some ways, COVID has become, through the awful horror of the last 18 months, the poster child for this movement, encouraging all stakeholders, including those that were and may have been antagonistic some time ago, to move to a world where all research findings can be accessed by anyone and everyone, wherever they are. And authors too have changed their behavior over the course of the last 15 months. For the academic community, which I also am part of, for all of their brilliance in developing new treatments and vaccines for COVID, in thinking through the social determinants of the impact of COVID, the way COVID spreads around the world, whichever bit of science that I've mentioned that scientists and the academic community have been working on, nevertheless, I do find, and I say this as a member of this community, that the academic community does remain incredibly conservative with regard to publishing behavior. And although universally, I think, the academic community does bemoan the slow pace of academic publishing, the 9 months or 12 months that it takes, and iterations and time spent away from people doing what they feel they should be doing in terms of their research, that the pandemic has actually started to change that perception. I think there's also a generational issue here, and there's a cultural issue across the world. But generally speaking, I think COVID will mark the time when the academic community did shift in their thinking in terms of when and how and why to make their research available. And perhaps the most evident example of this is in the widespread adoption of preprints, that authors share their effectively completed manuscripts ahead of submitting them for formal peer review and publication in a more traditional looking journal. And in fact, most of the key COVID papers were first published on any one of a number of archive systems that have been available globally. And that has led to a massive increase, of course, in submissions over the course of the last year or two. And of course, there have been questions asked. Not everything that gets available through the preprint service has had the quality assessment that is required. But overall, we all know that there are problems with the more traditional ways of reviewing, and not all even peer-reviewed articles prove to be as good as perhaps one was thought when they were first released. So I think, again, the peer review system, whether and how it's done in an innovative way, can address the issues of the quality of preprints prior to formal submission and acceptance. And of course, as many of you know better than I do, the peer review system is by no means perfect, and articles do inevitably, given the volume and the speed at which things happening in the formal publication literature, do sometimes need to be retracted or changed. And of course, we saw the real benefits. I mean, benefits that I think have still been underestimated on the early data sharing. In early January, and I was very involved in this from when I first heard about COVID on the 30th or 31st of December. And by early January, about the 10th or 11th, the first sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 genome was published by a consortium led by Professor Holmes in Sydney and Professor Zhen Zhang from Fudan University in Shanghai. It's difficult to overstate the importance of sharing of that genome sequence publicly. Sharing of that sequence allowed diagnostic tests to be developed around the world. And within a week or two of that coming out, there were also preprints released and published data on the clinical syndrome, on the transmission, including asymptomatic transmission of SARS-CoV-2 by about the 24th of January, such that actually by the 24th, 25th of January, data had been shared on the genomic makeup of this virus, the way it was transmitted, the fact that there was asymptomatic transmission, and the clinical syndrome, which has proved remarkably accurate over the course of the 18 months. So by the end of January, the world knew, in effect, what was coming. Did the world respond quickly enough to that knowledge? I would argue the world, particularly the Western world, did not respond fast enough in those last week or so of January. But nevertheless, the information was available. And as a result of that, diagnostic tests, as I've mentioned, but also treatments and vaccines could be started to be developed by about the 20th or so of January. And as a result of that, we have now, through science, whether it be behavioral science, vaccines, treatment, diagnostics, actually been able to plot a path that will allow us to exit the worst phase of this pandemic through 21 and 22. And I'll come back to why that is so critical, to not just bring open access to the table, but also commit as a world of scientists to sharing the benefits of making that information available. And that is something that we have failed to do to date, and we must address if we want there to be true sharing of information. It has to come with a commitment to sharing the benefits of sharing that information. And the debates at the moment around vaccine nationalism and vaccine inequality, I think, makes this whole argument of sharing of information so much harder, because clearly the world is not sharing the benefits of the shared data as well as we could and should do. One critical component that I think funders can play, and I speak now with a hat on of a funder and pay tribute to the European Commission, but also in the United States, the National Institutes of Health and the US government and many others. But funders have started to appreciate that this basic infrastructure, which essentially will allow science to take place and for science to bring the greatest benefits to everybody, is currently funded on soft term money and sort of cobbled together over the previous 10 or 20 years. And the European Commission, the National Institutes of the United States, and the Japanese government, amongst many others, have developed the data platforms and data infrastructure. In my view, and I'm sure this would be a view shared by many people on this call and this conference, is that this architecture and infrastructure is sort of equivalent to the 19th century train tracks. Unless we build this infrastructure and do that in a sustainable way, that is not going to suddenly fall over when the data demands grow bigger, as they inevitably will, I think this is as crucial as the infrastructure that brought us roads and railways and sanitation in the 19th century. And we must get that right. And I believe that has to move from soft grant type funding to sustained infrastructure funding, because without it, we will not be able to address the great challenges that I mentioned earlier of the 21st century. But not everything is rosy as it appears. And I'm going to just perhaps challenge all of us, certainly myself, but some perhaps on the call as well, that the sharing of research data is far from universal, and some of it does remain hidden in various ways, either behind paywalls, but also data unavailable or only available on request, with a lack of clarity about what those requests how they may be responded to. A recent search by PubMed Central Europe shows that only 9% of COVID-19 related research articles have any data availability statement, which tells us all how that data can be accessed. That's compared to almost 25% of all research published in 2020. So even COVID, although it is, I think, changed the way we think about these things and could be the catalyst, an awful catalyst, but a catalyst nonetheless, that could change the way we work, even that has not yet achieved what I think would be desirable in order to improve the outcomes from COVID. And even when authors do include a data availability statement, the criteria for accessing the data is often at best ambiguous or non-existent. For example, a recent study reported that 8% of data availability statements mention reasonableness as one of the criteria for granting access. Reasonableness is something very difficult to define. It means very different things to different people. And I think we must gain greater clarity of what really is expected of authors, of researchers, of funders, in order to make the data available. So this behavior is also mirrored in data related to COVID-19 clinical trials, for instance, which have been so critical in saving so many lives. A recent study found that data is only being shared in a minority of cases, about 15%, with nearly half, almost 48% of the trial registries, and explicitly saying they're not willing to share the data. These examples highlight there is still a very significant work to be done if we're going to shift the way research is done and the way research is shared. Controversially, I'm going to use GISAID, the viral genomic sharing platform, just as a case study of how this perhaps is working, but perhaps could work even better. The issues relate to the data sharing exemplified by the reaction to whether posting of the SARS-CoV-2 sequences in the GISAID repository is sufficiently open. GISAID developed before COVID-19 to protect the rights of researchers who have deposited SARS-CoV-2 sequences. They only make the data available to registered users who agree to make use of them under certain terms and conditions. The supporters of GISAID, and I've been a supporter of GISAID in many ways, but the supporters of GISAID argue that unless researchers are given the protection and the credit that services like GISAID provide, then the likelihood is they will not deposit their sequences anywhere. Other researchers believe that the access and reuse rights that GISAID apply to these genome sequences are too restrictive, and support calls from, amongst others, the European Bioinformatics Institute that in the pandemic, these data should be available to anyone and thus should be made available in public repositories like GeneBank and the ENA. This debate, I'm afraid to say, is often characterized by an argument between North and South, between haves and have-nots, between high-income and low-income countries, characterized where the rich North wants to get access to the data, to develop new vaccines, to protect their population, whilst those in the global South may not be able to access the very benefits I talked about earlier. In some ways, this debate is misplaced, as we all know, COVID is such a devastating impact on the world, and truly, no one is safe until everyone is safe. But the current inequity in vaccine access that we are seeing playing out is making this argument more complex. I was very involved in a very similar argument in 2004, when the Indonesian Minister of Health at the time asked, why should we share the sequences of the H5N1 bird flu, which in 2004 looked as if it may cause a devastating pandemic, Why should we share these sequences when all you'll do is make vaccines from them and try and sell them back to us at prices we can't afford, leading to a very inequitable access to the vaccines? Tragically, I don't think we've ever honestly answered that challenge from the Indonesian Ministry of Health. And I think some of that is now playing out. And I'm afraid this will get more tense and more complex if the world continues to have an inequitable access to the sharing of the benefits of sharing basic data and sequence information. And we can hide this, we can pretend it doesn't exist, but I think we have to challenge ourselves that if we are going to share data, repositories, information, publications, which I am all in favor of, we have to address the issues of how we ensure we share the benefits of sharing that information. And that's not limited to, but is certainly brought into stark focus around the issues of sharing access to vaccines that we see so inequitably distributed around the world at the moment. One approach to this is what we're doing at Wellcome, which is we've attempted to address these concerns by requiring that COVID sequences arising from our funding must be deposited in both GISAID and in the INSDC repositories at the same time. And Wellcome funded research can request a short delay in terms of access to the data, but that it must then become available in a realistic timeframe, which we do define. The last couple of points I'm going to make before finishing is public access is not open access. As discussed earlier, it's great that publishers have made the COVID literature free to read. However, that's not truly open access, as the right to reuse this data and content is restricted. For example, most articles are still published on an all rights reserved license. Some publishers have made it clear that once the pandemic is declared to be over, or indeed when some deem it to be over, these articles will once again be hidden behind a paywall, demonstrating that there remains a polarized debate here that we would, I think, be well advised to see the polarity of the debate and try and bridge those gaps that do exist if we're going to make the experience of the last 15 months come to have a greater benefit, even beyond COVID. Funders, I think, have played a critical role here. Wellcome, in partnership with more than 25 funders, including the Gates Foundation, the European Commission, HHMI, UKRI in the UK, and the World Health Organization, have essentially aligned our OA policies with Plan S now. And I'd like to pay tribute here to Robert Kiley, who's been so helpful over many, many years in pushing this whole agenda, and to thank him very much for all his thoughts and leadership on this issue. Under this policy that we now have in place, all research articles which arise from our funding must be made open accessible at the time of publication with no embargo, and be licensed in ways which allows the others to reuse the content in ways of their choice, subject only to the norms of academic behavior such as attribution and credit. So in conclusion, I think COVID has changed our lives, and pay tribute to all healthcare workers, researchers around the world who have worked so hard to try and find an exit strategy. But I believe that the COVID is, if you like, a symptom of an era that we are now moving into, which will not be COVID-like, but which will have some of the same drivers, and where science is going to have to find a different way of working, of engaging, of sharing, and sharing the benefits of. And I think the COVID has perhaps shone a spotlight in a way that this community knows very well, but perhaps the broader community doesn't, that there are shortcomings in the way that the scholarship publishing community works, and that does not always work in the best interests of the public that it serves, given so much of funding for science globally is funded through taxpayer and philanthropic funding. I think we all accept that the current publishing system is not serving the public as well as it could and should do. And COVID is an example, and that's why I think COVID is, like, if you like, an awful catalyst, and we must not underestimate the continued impact of COVID. But I think it is symptomatic of the sorts of challenges we're going to face in the 21st century, all of which are global, are transnational, are complex systems, bring about inequalities, where science has a critical role to play, but science as a part in a different way of society and amongst policymakers and amongst politicians, where decisions really matter, information really matters, and often those decisions have to be made earlier than you might like, amid uncertainty, and are often part of a polarized political and societal debate where conspiracy ideas thrive, social media has both its positives and negatives, and there are inevitably vested interests. So science is also moving into a new era, and the way we do science, the way we conduct science, the way we engage, the way we involve societies that we are all part of, I think will define how much science truly contributes to finding solutions to these great challenges of the 21st century, of which COVID is a very acute and horrific example, but will not be the last of its type or the other great challenges we face. So I think as a community of scientists and people committed to making sure the science is shared in an equitable way with the global public and with all colleagues in science and politicians, I think we have to challenge ourselves to think, how can we bridge the current polarized debate about publications, about data sharing, about repositories, and how can we absolutely commit as scientists that our work not just is shared, but that it becomes equitably available to everybody that needs it. And I think we need to seize the opportunity, challenge ourselves, and ensure that all research is published in a fast, open, and transparent way in which supports reproducibility, addresses the very issues of benefit and engenders trust, addresses the issues of inequality, but also can bring about the very positive and lasting outcomes, both for this awful health emergency, but also, as I say, for the great challenges of the 21st century. So Irina and Sarah, thank you very much for the invitation to come. I'll finish there and hand back to you. I hope that was of some interest.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was very powerful, and I love your railroad tracks metaphor. I'll be using it when I'll be talking about infrastructures, because it's really right there. And I was wondering, we represent a community of public institutions, public infrastructures. It's a global community, and what do you think could we do as a community to enable positive things happen? Speaking about infrastructures, is it about community governance and community principles and defining what really matters for specific research communities and making those principles and governance as part of data sharing or publication sharing practices? Could this be done on the global scale? Any recipe for us from your experience?
Yeah, I think it is all of those. Governance is critical, and people have to have trust in governance. I think some of the challenges to GISAID, as just as an example, but it's not limited to GISAID, is do people have trust in the system? Will it work for them? Is it accessible, as this community has so strongly argued for? But I think the other thing that COVID changes, and it's related to this, is I think stopping at the science, stopping at the governance issues, stopping at the organization is not enough. We can see how these issues, and it's true for climate, drug resistance, energy access, water access, gender equality, these are social and political issues as well. And I think we as scientists need to embrace that and not, if you like, be frightened about it. If you want to bring about change, we must and will do work within the scientific world. But I think we also have to work within the rest of society where science flourishes. That means, yes, of course, with the public, with communities. That, yes, means in politics and in policy making. And that's not being natural bedfellows sometimes for scientists. And after COVID, with the horrific social media responses to some scientists, death threats and other things, it's not a particularly attractive place to be. But I think if we want to really change things, then we have to embrace a voice into that debate, and to do so from the basis of knowledge, but also some principles that you rightly say about sharing of benefits, sharing of data, sharing of public resources, and be involved and not be frightened about that debate. Science has never, well, in recent memory, really, had a platform where it's been so much in the public eye, as with COVID over the last 15 months, and it won't just go away again. And I think that's the new world we have to embrace.
Thanks a lot. That's very encouraging. We have a question in the chat from Ellen. Jeremy, can you say something on the benefits of open access for achieving UN Sustainable Development Goals? Thanks.
Yeah, it goes back to, I think, the comment about the equivalent to the 19th century train and roads sanitation systems. We can't achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which we have not lost. They remain, I believe, the best pathway to a sustainable future and a healthier and less inequitable future. But without the ability of the broad scientific endeavor to contribute to them, and the willingness to share that with the world, and to ensure that that science becomes part of policy making, and we do that transnationally, then I don't think we cannot achieve the SDGs, certainly not within the time frame that they have been laid out for. So I think, again, COVID has demonstrated that you can make progress at a speed that, frankly, most scientists thought was impossible a year ago. And the open access way that has happened has been a major part of both the speed with which it's been achieved, but also at the quality of which it's been achieved. But, and there is a big but at the end of this, if we do not also commit to sharing the benefits, then that scientific endeavor will only add to the inequalities that exist. And that's why I think we have to challenge ourselves as how to bring these twins together. Sharing is critical, but so is the sharing of the benefits.
Thank you so much. Kathleen is asking, thanks for the great talk. The inequality often comes about because of commercialization, as highlighted by your Indonesian example. Do you think there should be limitations or constraints to commercial participation in open science, open access system?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think we cannot see. I'm against seeing the world fragmented by either nation states, by disciplines of science, or indeed by academia versus industry, because we cannot achieve the SDGs, we cannot bring the pandemic to an end unless we find an accommodation between public and private sector, the strengths of both of them, the role they both play, the critical need for the public sector to invest in both infrastructure and academic work and science, but also an appreciation that, with a very few exceptions, the public sector is not going to make those vaccines at the scale that is required, or the drugs that will save people's lives, or other events, engineering, whatever it is in other sectors beyond the biomedical sector. And so I think, again, for me, the lesson of COVID is how interrelated this all is, whether it is national relatedness, whether it is the sharing of genomic sequences, or the willingness to work across disciplines within the academic sector, or the willingness of the academic sector and the industrial sector to work together. I just think we need transparency about what each brings to the table, and transparency about what is the driver of those sectors. But I do not believe the future lies in exclusion. I think it lies, as Sarah said at the beginning of this talk, about being inclusive, about bringing the diverse skills that are required, and that will sometimes be in the public sector and it'll sometimes be in the private sector. We need to embrace those because neither can do it on their own.
Thank you so much. There is a question from Moni. Thank you for your excellent talk, Jeremy. The Wellcome Trust has done great work with researchers in low and middle income countries and open data sharing. How can other funders model your work, indeed provide low and middle income countries the tools to lead the data activities, for example, through funding for infrastructure, staff, other resources, rather than through the sponsored organizations in high impact countries? Thinking investment and strategy locally is a key.
Yeah, sorry, Irina, I can't see the questions before they pop up. I'm not sure that I've.
So it's in the Q&A.
I've got them. Sorry,
it's the first one in the Q&A.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think on this again. I mean, again, we can use COVID as an excuse, or we can say it was a trend that was happening. And I believe it was a trend that was happening before COVID. And I think this gets to, at least starts to address the issues around data sharing. I think it addresses the issues of inequality of access to the benefits. And that is a phrase I've used too many times. And that is a shift in the center of gravity. It is great to hear that there are 1,300 participants in this conference from 90 countries. It's disappointing there's nobody from Antarctica, but it's great to see all other continents represented. And I think, and I think you're leading on some of these areas, and the fallout from COVID, the virtual conferences, the ability to link up in ways that we probably thought were unimaginable 2 years ago, gives us a great opportunity to what I call shift the center of gravity. And what I mean by that is where the research agendas, the decision-making processes, the transparency is not based necessarily in Washington or in Paris or London or Beijing, but is based where the issues are at their greatest. And I think that comes back again to some of the issues you've raised around governance, transparency, and the more we can shift this, including because funding and money is a route to achieving this. You can't do it without those. And also around good governance, I think will allow a more democratic and more equitably globally shared research agenda. And I think then some of the issues around sharing of data and sharing the benefits of sharing that can be at least mitigated, if not completely removed.
Thank you. And there is a question from Hardy. Thanks for this great talk. I'm wondering if you see a role for sharing data sets with licenses that mandate sharing of derivative works, for example, Creative Commons attribution share alike.
Yeah, Hardy, it's a great question. I mean, I think that is the sort of thinking we need. Is if you like to think, where are we today, and where would we like to be? You know, not just sort of incrementally, but can we use the horror of the last 18 months to say, really, as a result of open sharing, from that genome sequence on the 10th or 11th of January to the information on the 24th of January, that we had the information we needed within a month, really, of the first cluster being identified. And as a result of that, we have the social behavior, the sociology, the anthropology, the behavioral sciences, the vaccines, the treatments within a time frame. Those are related. So don't ask the question of where are we today and can we consolidate that, but where would we like to be to address these great challenges in due course? And can we use the speed at which things have happened that have challenged everybody to think in a different way to be, what would we really like to have in place to ask the question, what if we could do this, rather than what can we get away with? And so questions like that from Hardy, asking, you know, can you see a role here for mandating sharing of derivative works and making sure that credit flows as a result of that, along with other, that's, I think, the sort of question we can now and should be asking.
Thank you so much. And speaking about speed, I was wondering, how do you cope with pressure? Because we've been complaining that we have all this Zoom fatigue and multitasking and working from home and everything. But I can imagine that in your line of work, this pressure has always been very, very high. And what's your recipe?
I don't think there is any recipe, and I'm sure my pressure on me is no greater than anybody else. At the moment, I don't have to write grants, which I always found one of the most difficult and pressured situations possible. I think for me, and everybody's different, I think the most important thing for me is that you have somewhere to go, a place or a time. I think it doesn't matter. I think time is more important than place, where you can, if you like, escape to to reduce the pressures that you put on yourself and others may or may not put on you. And I've just come back, for instance, from a long weekend on the west coast of Scotland, which uncharacteristically was wall-to-wall sunshine and a stunningly natural spot on the west coast of Scotland. And just getting away there for what was in the end about 2 days made a huge difference. I do escape a lot by playing sport. I know others do the same by playing music or reading poetry or whatever. I just think we have to have somewhere we can go where you're a little bit protected. You can go into a different world almost, and it's a sort of not a secret space, but it's a space you can go to and just shake off some of those pressures that are no different to me, to everybody else.
Thank you so much. When we were planning your talk, our colleague Claire shared a recording of your talk with Lavelle on desert island discs, and I put in a link in the chat, and that was an excellent program, and I really enjoyed listening to it, and it was very inspiring to me. So if you have time, listen to it as well. And thank you so much, Jeremy. That was excellent. Thanks a lot for spending this hour with us, and for your leadership and all for all your work.
No, thank you very, very much indeed. It's a pleasure to join you. The work that you are all doing is phenomenal and is making a difference. All I would say to you and challenge is don't stop. Ask the question, what if, rather than let's make it a little bit better. And I think dream of what things could be, because you never know. If you don't dream, you won't achieve them. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much. What inspiring words to end on. So
thank you. I'll have to drop off, but
thank you so much. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So we are moving on with our program, and we can either start straight away with ideas challenge, or we can take 5 minutes break. So what do you say, Nick?
That's hi Irina, hi everyone. That's really up to you, and I mean, it was such an inspiring talk. It might be that people will need some time to get everything in and to think about it a little bit more. And this session will last for 45 minutes. So either we start like in 5 and we end a little bit before the next one. So to give small breaks in between sessions.
Because I think it's also a good bridge to the ADS challenge, because that's where we can really think big and dream.
It is. That's what I was thinking actually, and it's interesting because especially at the end, I mean, the talk itself was very inspiring, and then he thought about dreams, and that's what Open Repositories have been trying to push for the past few years with ADS Challenge, is dreaming about solutions that can actually solve problems, and so I'm happy to start now and give time to Tomasz also to present something.
Why don't we go ahead and get started then?
Cool.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I have a few slides that I can share. If you don't mind, let me know if you actually see the slides in the right order, or I have to flip.
We see them in a presenter mode.
Okay.
You have to untick the view. And let me introduce Michele Mennielli from LYRASIS, who was driving Open Repositories Ideas Challenge for the past year. And at the session we are in now, welcome if you've just joined us.
Thank you.
It's still in the presenter mode. I think in PowerPoint you have to untick presenter mode.
How about now?
Yeah, now it's perfect. Over to you.
Thank you, Ina, and hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. That's the beauty of a virtual meeting in general, but particularly of Open Repository, and it's astonishing the numbers of registrations and the high interest for this conference over the year. I'm not gonna take too much time for this, because I'm here just to present something new that we're trying to do last year, and it brought us here. It was a challenge itself to think about how Ideas Challenge could actually work remotely, because Ideas Challenge is an initiative of Open Repositories that is based on social networking and in-person chat, informal chats that happens throughout the conference. Now, doing this and moving this virtually and spread it over a full year, it was a challenge, but it was rewarding for several aspects. We learned a lot, and we're trying to present the results here. So everything started last June, so basically a year ago, with the first social gathering that we had to brainstorm about different ideas. We picked the themes of the conference and put them all together in 4 main themes: inclusivity, integration, access and discovery, and policies and copyrights. And so we gathered together with anyone who wanted to think about new things and dream about new ideas. We split our rooms in 4, and we just have conversations for 1 hour. It wasn't a packed room, obviously, as it is the one today, but there were over 25 people from all over the world discussing about different ideas. I'm going to share the links of the results of their conversations later in the chat. But we used a kind of a mind mapping tool to brainstorm around a few ideas, and the result you see here, obviously you can't really read it, but everything is public, and I'll share it later on. So after the first meeting, we had a second meeting, which was a little bit more operational, let's say. After gathering a bunch of ideas, we met again, and we gave the opportunity to the presenters, let's say, or the group coordinators, to share a little bit more details on the ideas they had in mind, to try, we call it pitch, recruit, and brainstorm, to try to get the attention and interest of other members of the communities. And that conversation ended up with 4 main ideas in groups that had the chance to meet throughout the year and present something today. Now, as I said at the beginning, so I'll say it later on. So as I said at the beginning, the challenge was to try to keep the attention going and the groups working in such a long time. But Tomasz today will be a little bit more explicit about that and his experience, because he was coordinating the first group, WikiData, DBpedia, and ML algorithm, and he's going to go a little bit more in detail with that presentation. But what we did after that meeting, we created a Slack channel for the Ideas Challenge, and where people could actually interact and share ideas. And I'll share the link with the descriptions and the groups of the different 4 ideas later on in the chat. So the other ideas, one is the PubPub integrations with repositories. Another one is, as you can see here, is the open publication publishing systems and integrations with other data sources. And then another idea was split in 2, which is the repository information page. And then the idea was to scrubbing citations from attached full text and display that against the repository record. Out of those 4 ideas, 1 will be presented today. But that doesn't mean that the other ideas were completely abandoned. So that's the next step that we wanted to suggest today. After Tomasz' presentations and the interesting way his group actually interacted in the past year, the idea will be to use this conference to give you the chance to join the conversations around those ideas. So the Slack channel is still active. You can still ask questions, and if you're interested, participating, and see if there's a way during the conference to move those ideas a little bit forward. At the end of the conference, as you probably see in the program, there's a slot after the closing remarks. There's a slot for ideas challenge again. The idea would be for anyone who is interested in sharing new ideas, because maybe you got inspired during the conference and you have something you want to share and suggest, and you have something in mind you want to work in next year. The other option would be for you to join those conversations and as a group present something during that slot. If you have a new idea that you want to share at the end of the conference and you want to get someone involved and work on this during the year, you're going to have, exactly like Tomasz today, a slot and the opportunity during next year conference, most likely in person this time, to present what you've been working on. So to try to create a link between conferences and get inspired in one and present to the next one. Those are everything I had to say. I'm gonna let Tomasz share the idea and his experience with this new concept of the Ideas Challenge, and I will share all the links with useful information in the chat later on. So thank you so much, and Tomasz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michele. Good morning, everyone. I guess morning for me, anyway. So I'm going to share my screen. So can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm very happy to be presenting this, the work of our Ideas Challenge team that took place over the last year, starting at the last year and around this time. Myself and Irina actually will present on behalf of this team. That includes Daisy, Tembe, Nicholas, Thomas, Joe, Heather, Francisco, Phil, Kathleen, Victor, and Slava. I'll talk a bit about the process of the series of meetings that we had. I'll go over the original pitch that all of this idea challenge started with, what the actual challenge that we tackled, and to share some results of what we learned along the way, because really was an experience of learning over the course of the year. So in terms of the process, I had the original pitch for the idea, which was all about integrating essentially WikiData and repositories. We had a good discussion there, and with COVID, things didn't progress quite so much actually until the end of the year, towards the end of the year, where we started to meet again on a more regular basis. We had a series of meetings, and what was really nice about this, normally Ideas Challenge is a very short time span, but because we had more time, we could take on, I guess, more ambitious challenges, and so and bring in more people. And so over the course of the year, we had new members join the team and participate in meetings, and they would find about it through word of mouth, or through other meetings, or through connections. And so just to jump to the original pitch, this is kind of from my original pitch. You probably all know this, but I'll just say that we all know, Wikipedia is a crowdsourced encyclopedia in multiple languages. So the relationship between that and DBpedia is that DBpedia is an auto-extracted machine-readable structure from Wikipedia, and there are separate data sets for each language. And Wikidata is really a unified data set for all languages. So its scope is broader than Wikipedia and DBpedia. It's crowdsourced linked data for all knowledge. So content is extracted from Wikipedia to Wikidata and vice versa, because actually Wikidata shows up in info boxes in Wikidata. And so really the question is, where do repository items fit in with this structure? Are they represented? And that's where we began. And so this is an example of a Wikidata entry. You see it's unified for languages, meaning that there's one identifier and label, but there are also translated labels in many languages. And so, the potential benefits of integration with Wikidata that were identified early on was increased visibility, multilingual indexing of repository contents, also suggestions for places in Wikipedia that are relevant to what the people are depositing. Also the ability there are some very nice built-in visualization tools in Wikidata. Also the increase of institutional knowledge about what research outputs of the institution. And this one was added later, credit to Slava, which is the idea of the semantic search becoming reality. So, the knowledge graph, the search by concept idea. We, just to go back to the slide, we decided to focus on, after the second meeting, really to try and focus on the multilingual indexing aspect. And why did we find that to be a kind of a compelling use case? And not that the other ones are less compelling, but we found this particularly compelling, in part because in the context of an international conference on open repositories, seemed like a really appropriate place to be addressing linguistic diversity as well of research access. Also, language allows you to have ideas otherwise unhavable. And by extension, people who own different words live in different conceptual worlds. So, the beauty of this is the idea from Benjamin Lee Whorf, and so the beauty of linguistic diversity is that reveals to us how ingenious and how flexible the human mind is. This is a quote by Lyra Boroditsky, who has studied the impact of language on thought. So human minds have invented not one cognitive unit, but 7,000. And the example that's given in this article, which I thought is really interesting, is that of a 5-year-old girl in a small Aboriginal community in Northern Australia, who is able to point, like any other speaker of that language, to immediately point to north if asked. And if I asked you all to point north or south right now, if you would be able to get it right away, I'm not sure. But the speakers of this Cook Tayora language can always know their cardinal directions, because the language uses those at all scales. And so you would say, for example, the cup is southeast to the plate, and the boy is standing south of Mary. The boy that is standing south of Mary is my brother, this sort of thing. And more specifically in the science communication and research literature, there are compelling motivations, to increase linguistic diversity, publishing, and access. So there's evidence, for example, that studies published in languages other than English are often neglected when research teams conduct systematic reviews. There's a dominance of English in scholarly communication, which is evident in natural science, but it's also evident in the social sciences. And so this quote from Irina Balkova, the Director General of UNESCO, comments like this about this: social science endeavor is also poorer for its bias towards English and English-speaking developed countries. This is a missed opportunity to explore perspective and paradigms that are embedded in other cultural and linguistic traditions. And so more culturally and linguistically diverse approach by the social sciences would be of tremendous value to organizations such as UNESCO in terms of fostering mutual understanding and intercultural dialogue. And in an article based on the 1996-2012 content in JSTOR and Scopus, for example, which was found to be nearly 90% English, authors commented further that this shortcoming of the social sciences in terms of incorporating non-English research seems ironic, because the social sciences study societies and social phenomena, And social science research informs social, economic, and cultural policies, and language is integral to all of that. And so, translations of metadata, such as keywords, titles, abstracts, are a recommended way, as one of the recommended ways of increasing multilingualism in science communication. So some of our team members were from Africa Archive, which was launched in August 2018 to foster language diversity and science communication in traditional African languages. It is contributing to decolonization by promoting an understanding of decolonization through preprints, accepting preprint submissions in both lingua franca and native languages, and enabling ownership of African research by Africans through establishing a decentralized Africa-owned digital repository for the African continent. And so to demonstrate here, I show you here a WikiData entry for Lyme disease, and you could see that one of the translated labels in Polish for this is borrelioza. And when you do a search for this in different search engines, you see that there is, if you search for Lyme disease versus borrelioza, this demonstrates also this idea of semantic search clearly is not yet working because the number of results there's no comparison. So in terms of this test, the base that has a multilingual search option, and it retrieved it's about 7,500 articles when searching for the Polish term versus 15,000 in English. So that's at least around 50% when the multilingual option is on. But all of the other search engines that we tried, so Google Scholar, which retrieved 140,000 versus 1,600, Open Air Search, PubMed Central, Core, there's really no comparison in terms of searching for these in the two languages, and there's no real gateway between the two languages. These search engines aren't really informing when I search in English of the content, some of the content that exists in Polish and vice versa. And to be clear, an search engine like Google Scholar, which is very popular, does have an option to search for pages written in any language. But so why does it exclude so much content in English on Lyme disease when I enter the name of the disease in Polish, etc. So the reason is. In general, search engines like Google Scholar exhibit a preference for translations of full text only and have kind of a difficulty as a matter of policy and/or technology for indexing translated metadata specifically, and especially multilingual content that isn't clearly partitioned into pages that include only one language at a time. These search engines only want to know what your preferred language is and only serve you results in the language that they think is your preferred language. So, multilingual journal abstracts, keywords, and titles have existed for a really long time, even before journals moved online. So this is an example of a chemistry journal that includes content in German, French, and English, with translations of abstracts and titles provided. So this example is actually a French language article, but searching for keywords that appear in English yields only a sort of a citation record in Google Scholar and without a link. And there's a comment that says, showing the best results for the search, clicking on, and you could click on see all results. And so if you jump through that hoop, you actually get a link to the French language title. This issue isn't just an issue for search engines. It's also an issue for publishers and data providers, in that if you could examine the metadata for this item, you see that because this is actually the full text is in French, but it is sort of incorrectly tagged as being in English, and which includes the cross-ref metadata for it. And so I think there is a general, we could really do, there's a lot of work to be done to sort of improve how we, the metadata that we provide for multilingual sort of translated titles, translated keywords, and translations of full text. This is an example of a search in searching for an article title in Portuguese brings up actually an English search result in Google Scholar because the full text is in English. This is actually an example of some where it works well, and from an article that is in Cielo. So this article is, I think the full text is in English, but because there's translations of the title in Portuguese, you could actually find it easier, more easily. And so we experimented, you know, the IDS challenge has always been about sort of trying things. And so we experimented with, we wanted to experiment with actually tagging repository contents with using some sort of a machine learning algorithm or some sort of an automated way to enrich repository contents with WikiData. Just before I move on here, we also had, I want to make sure to state that we had this discussion about what translation really, the broader theme of translation, what it means for repositories. And you know, I sort of I identify, let's say, three levels of translation. So there's the translation of the interface itself, the functional links, the informational labels. There's the translations of metadata field values, and the translation of the full text content. And what we're focused on is that middle one, which is the translations of the actual translations of metadata field values. And so in order to be able to do that though, right, we need a way to present that metadata. We need a way to share that metadata with search engines, with aggregators. And we realized quickly in our discussions, in our meetings, that we were actually confused about how to do that. What are the best practices for doing that? And so part of the results here is really the sharing of what we learned. And so, and of course, how you share that depends on what the context is. In the context of HTML and Dublin core, high-wire press tags, which is very common context for repositories of sharing the metadata just as HTML pages. We have this lang and attribute in HTML, and similarly an XML lang attribute for XML-based content, such as XHTML. And so this really specifies the primary language of the element's content and for any element's attributes that contain text. So this means that you can assign this attribute to really any element in HTML5. And the way in which you construct these language tags, these language codes, this is, as far as I can see, the best practice, the current best practice for doing that. There is a couple of ISO standards. There's a two-letter ISO standard, 6391, which is the recommended one, really, because it's simplest, unless you need to make it more complex. And so this BCP, this RFC 5646, sort of describes how to augment that if you need to be more specific. So for example, if you want to say that it's English, but as used in the United States, you put a dash, you separate it by a dash and add the US, at the name of the country or the region of the language, or you could also add the writing system. So in this case, the Serbian written using the Cyrillic script would be SR-CYRL. And here you see on the slide, you have how you could use Dublin core to the DC subject. You would add a language equals Japanese or Polish or English. And similarly for high-wire press tags, which are the sort of the preferred tagging that Google Scholar lists, you'd use citation keywords, and then you would separate the keyword groups by language and specify which language they're in. So this search for kind of multilingual structures, like multilingual tagging, for me, it began with this journal, the JATS, Journal Article Tag Suite. It's a NISO standard. It's an old standard, dating back to early 2000s. It's used by big publishers, National Library of Medicine. Plan S has recently commented on having this as a recommendation. In terms of the way in which that they have some clear recommendations on how to deal with translated abstracts, translated titles, and they actually have their own separate trans title tag and a separate trans abstract tag, for example. But because it's an XML format, they use the standard XML lang attribute, which can be applied to kind of almost any element, including this identifying these translations of abstracts and titles. And specifically for us, for Wikidata, they actually include some nice recommendations for keywords. And again, so if it's just the keywords are actually grouped by language here. And so you have this keyword group tag where you specify the language of it using the XML lang attribute, and you list all the keywords in that language. And what's really nice is you can also include, you can make it more sophisticated and actually include the name of the controlled vocabulary, the identifier, and the term identifier as well for each of the keywords. In terms of other standards, metadata standards that used is we have, for example, DataCite schema does a good job. It has some comprehensive recommendations for including subject tags, and as well this scheme URI, value URI, and language. So the scheme URI is in this case would be the link to Wikidata. The value URI would be the specific link to the so-called Q code, the concept, the specific concept. You augment that with the language and of the label and list each language. Now, OpenAIRE uses kind of the DataCite schema, recommends the DataCite schema for data repositories, but in their latest version of the guidelines for literature repositories, however, there isn't really anything like this. So all that is there is a language at the content level. So no explanation for how to include granularity for providing translated keywords or titles or abstracts. So there's only kind of it's really the language of the full text that you can specify only. So I think that's something that could change. By the way, this the second concept here on this slide is the concept. I hope I pronounced this right in Japanese, komorebi. It's a, let's say, translated roughly as light that filters through the trees. You can see the Wikipedia page for this beautiful concept. And so it's an example to why I like this example is because there's not a lot of translations of this label that exists as an entity in Wikidata, and but the label is translated maybe to 1 or 2 languages and certainly not in English or not in English. And so when tagging, that doesn't mean, I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't mean that because we use Wikidata that all of the languages will have all of this, will have equivalency in terms of labels. And there's actually a lot of interesting work that needs to be done in adding more labels in more languages to Wikidata. Schema.org is another one that I looked at. They introduced recently a defined term, which is, again, you can specify, like in the other formats, you can specify, this is a JSON format, and you can specify the scheme URI, the identifier itself, and the name. However, when you try to signal what language the label is in, then the let's say the schema.org validator from Google complains that the language is not an expected property of defined term, and I think it should be. Now, schema.org is an open community process developed initiative. So I think we have maybe a role there to play to advocate for language becoming a property. Yeah. So anyway, it's what the validator gives a warning at this point, and so it's not like it's an error to provide the name of the language. Irina, are you going to say a few words about Dublin Core?
Yes, we also looked at existing guidelines for repository managers on exposing metadata in different languages. And you can see on the slide some examples. how the title could be displayed in a repository in different languages, or there is also a recommendation how keywords could be included in DC subject field. Then maybe if we go to the next slide, we also consulted with our colleagues from JP Core in Japan, and they developed JP Core metadata schema. And you can see an example here from University of Tokyo repository. And there is a title in Japanese, and language is specified as Japanese. And there is also alternative title in English. The same goes for creator. So there is creator in Japanese, and then alternative creator in English, and there is a language tag attached to that metadata field specifying in which language metadata is included.
Okay, thank you so much, Irina. Yeah, so we really it's a good moment to say that in addition to those 5 meetings, we actually had a lot of satellite meetings with different different groups. It's been a really fascinating journey. So Ideas Challenge, traditionally we did want to try some. We didn't want to write some code. We wanted to do some kind of Wikidata enrichment, and one of the team members, Francisco Berisbeitia, wrote a script, and it's available on GitHub, that takes let's say an ePrints JSON LD output from the repository. So this is a kind of a JSON formatted metadata from a repository, and it uses DBpedia Spotlight, which is a kind of an automated model, AI model for annotating these abstracts with DBpedia links, entities. And then the script actually uses those DBpedia links to then go to Wikidata and extract all of the different labels and all of the different languages that exist. So in essence, the script would takes an export from a repository and creates very multilingual indexing of that content through DBpedia Spotlight Wikidata. And I took this script and modified it slightly to accept a slightly different JSON format that was available for this specific data set, which is around 3,000 publications in information visualization from different conferences, 30 years of conference proceedings and information visualizations. I added the ability to sort of specify which particular language I wanted to be sort of indexed in using, by forking Francisco's script, and ran it on this data set to see what I would learn, what we would find. And so here you could see what it takes the title abstract and any of the author keywords and generates these French language actually indexing. And we learned that in this experiment, there's out of the 3,400 or so articles, there was about 2,200 entities that were annotated with 95% confidence. Although, of course, the DBpedia Spotlight, it doesn't always get everything right. There is some room for error. Some of the concepts identified might be incorrect, like New York City, the band, versus New York City, the city. And things like that. And there is, tweaking to DBpedia Spotlight that you can do to try and get that matching more precise, and also the need for build, because these automated systems rely on training data, and so to build training data sets in different languages and more precise ones. Anyway, for the French, for moving into French, about 83% of that had French labels. There was also some ambiguity in that we were going from DBpedia to Wikidata. It showed some instances where there was multiple links from DBpedia to Wikidata for certain concepts, which was interesting in itself. So this is a visualization here of once you have this, of a kind of a co-concept map in French for this data set. And here you see when you zoom in on a node that has this ambiguity present. So for certain nodes, I had multiple labels in French because of the multiple links between the two open data systems. And when looking, and in fact, information visualization was one of them. And if you look at, to dig in, for example, why, you see, well, there is actually an ongoing debate about merging data visualization and information visualization. And so that's why in this case, there's actually this, there are multiple links between the two systems. So it's a, it's good to remember that it's fluid. These data sources are changing, but it was a relatively small percentage, just 4% that had this type of ambiguity. Yeah, and so I'm coming to the end of what we learned. We also have in this presentation, which I will share, because it has a lot of good links. In terms of our script, probably would be better, instead of using the public API, to use the data bus, which has you could download the full data set. So for example, very specific sort of extracts, and this one is just all of the different labels in the different languages with correspondence between WikiData. So it's kind of extracted. So instead of making hundreds of calls to the DB Spotlight, to the WikiData API or the DBpedia API to extract things, it's actually pre-extracted on a regular basis. This is the link for the DBpedia Spotlight that I mentioned. The models that exist right now is in these languages: English, German, Dutch, French. So there's Portuguese, Hungarian. This is the tool for automatically annotating mentions, for annotations. And of course, the question, well, why isn't there more languages? And because this is an open source tool, this community is in need of adding more. And so I think one way we can contribute as a community is to train more models. It requires a corpus that's specific to the language. And so another really interesting example is ANIF. It's a similar tool to DBpedia Spotlight. It was developed by the National Library of Finland, and for the Finnish language. And here you see, and they've done some fantastic work actually in this area. And here you see on the slide, you see screenshots of results from an automated indexing from ANIF based on a WikiData vocabulary. And there's a related project to this launched recently called Finto AI, which uses the general Finnish ontology as well. And it's based on the corpus from the national, in Finnish, Swedish, and English from the National Library of Finland. And recently, University of Jyväskylä, I hope I pronounced that right, submitting their master thesis to the JIGS repository, get suggestions from ANIF that they can use or modify before accepting them when submitting their master's thesis, which is really great. So in terms of controlled vocabularies, there's Cosmos. ANIF uses this to host their sort of controlled vocabulary and others. Multilingual vocabulary, if you want to be, if you need a more controlled multilingual vocabulary other than WikiData. What else? This slide actually borrows from Slava Tikhonov, one of our team members, who presented on the work that he's been doing with Dataverse and integrating WikiData and Dataverse. And he articulated here very nicely the need for including the following subfields in order to be able to have kind of a linked open data vocabularies as part of repositories. So the vocabulary name, the URL, the label term, and the term URL. And I would add to that list the need to specify the language of the label as well. And early on as well, in our meetings, we identified really the need to establish these are difficult challenges, and they need to really work within kind of communities of practice around how to do this, how to do multilingual, how to improve multilingual access in repositories, how to improve linked open data integration in repositories. There are two specific existing communities of practice, but I'm hoping that we will, in essence, through open repositories, have our own as well. The TranslateWiki.net is a translation community and a localization platform for free and open source projects that started with translation of MediaWiki. This is kind of a crowdsourced translation of interfaces for open systems, and very recently launched translationscience.org, which one of our team members is a part of, and as you know, they have a mailing list, a blog, and they're really looking to share information and on breaking these barriers to science through to increase really multilingual access. And I think these are the Ideas Challenge teamers, to whom I thank very much. And thank you very much for listening to me. And I hope we can continue the discussion during the conference of some of these topics.
And it's really an open call to everyone who is interested. Please join us, because the reason I got involved, it would be good to have some guidance for repository managers how to improve discoverability. Our colleague Kathleen from Core is also on the team, and she's interested to produce some recommendations to repository managers. So please join us, talk to us at networking platforms, or let's get in touch via Slack or email. And it was an exciting journey, and we met a lot of people on it, and it would be good to be working with you as well if you're interested. And thanks a lot, Tomasz, for driving it.
Thank you, Tomasz, and thank you, Irina, for sharing all of this. I mean, as Jeremy said in his keynote, it's fascinating how you can dream of things and then see them happening throughout this year through collaboration. So this, for me, it's a fantastic example of what Ideas Challenge could be and what this can represent for the open repository community. So I just echo what both Tomasz and Irina said to all of you. So if you're interested or you have something to share, join the conversation. We share in the chat the informations to join it. And if you have updates or you want to use the networking sessions also to discuss new ideas, we'll see you again at the end of the conference. Before closing this session, we have a few minutes more. So if you have questions for Tomasz or Irina, please share them. And see it. Thank you. If not, we can move to the next session soon, Irina. And again, see you, and I hope to hear lots of new ideas on Thursday.
Thanks a lot, Mick. Our next session starts in 11 minutes, and it will be a panel, Speaking Up and Speaking Out, who will shape the narrative for open access repositories. And we have an excellent lineup of speakers. Kathleen Shearer from Core, Eloy Rodriguez from University of Minnesota, Johan Rurik from Leiden University and Coalition S, and Dominic Babini from Clark's. So let's take this 10 minutes break, and I'm handing over moderation to Leila, who will take over for the next session. And thanks for joining us. Let's get a cup of tea or coffee.